So this girl says that she has an uncle who is a tattoo artist, but he refuses to tattoo anything that has to do with demons, and it is because of something he experienced that sounds like it came out of a horror movie. So there was one day where the uncle was at his tattoo shop. He didn't have any appointments, and this guy comes and asks him for a quote on a tattoo of a demon. Again, the uncle didn't have many appointments, not even that week, so he actually quoted him a really good price so that the guy would agree, and he did. The uncle explains that before he even started doing the tattoo, everything started going wrong. The lights in the studio completely shut off, so he started using his generator, but then his machine completely burned out. That bed that they use where the clients lay on to get the tattoos completely gave out on that client. Jokingly, they both start laughing and saying it seems like the demon doesn't want to get tattooed on you, and again, it was a joke. They start laughing out loud. He ends up doing that tattoo, and it ends up looking really well. It was in black and white. It was like a realistic portrait. The guy who got the tattoo done was so happy with it. He tells him that he's going to tell his friends so that they can come and get something similar done with him. By this point, years have passed. The uncle got married and they were at a family reunion, and his wife's family were talking about tattoos and how they can be removed. That's when he tells them that tattoos could be removed, but it would be with laser, and it was a very painful process. He tells them how it was very expensive and that it would take several sessions to get a tattoo completely removed. And that's when his father-in-law says, well, maybe they should just burn it off of their skin like the story of the guy. And he's like, what story? Like, what do you mean this guy burned off a tattoo? His father-in-law tells him that there was a guy who got a tattoo done on his arm of a demon, and that within a week he was having insomnia. This guy started having nightmares, and he swears that he would be awoken because his tattoo would start talking to him and telling him how he should hurt himself. This guy started going crazy. He said he would sometimes wake up because he swore to hear the sounds of hell, like if things were being burned. This guy got so crazy that one night he ends up lighting fire to his arm where the tattoo was. He ended up injuring himself really bad, but he is still alive. Now, this is where the uncle just stayed very quiet because he remembers doing that tattoo on the guy's arm and also doing a whole bunch of demon tattoos on a lot of people after that. He stayed very quiet. He didn't say anything to them. He didn't tell them that he had done a lot of demon tattoos on these people, but that same night he did have to go to his studio to pick up some money because he had to pay something. And while he's in the studio, he hears that a glass breaks in his gallery. When he goes and checks, he sees that all the glass and all the portraits are fine except the one of the guy's picture that he took, and the glass right in front of that demon picture was completely broken. At this point, he is a little, scared, and he ends up calling a friend that he knew that was into Santeria. The friend ends up going to his studio and he starts telling them like everything that happened, the story that he heard, and he had been doing these tattoos. And his friend said that the demon is actually really angry with him. He was angry because they made fun of him. His friend ends up bringing priests. They all do the holy water. They actually took that portrait of the guy's tattoo and they ended up burning it with a couple of I don't know what this is called in English, but it was hoja de un domingo de ramos, and that they prayed while it was burning. The uncle didn't have any more experiences after all of this happened, and he was still curious to see if the guy that burned his arm was the same guy that he had tattooed, and unfortunately he confirmed that it was the same guy. Ever since then, he made a promise that he would never tattoo demons on anybody, and he hasn't done that ever since. But what do you guys think?
Scary story time while I make slime. Get your money's worth and let it drain. Like, y'all, I could not make this up. Like, no. So, y'all, this happened a couple hours ago, and I'm at loss for words. I was home alone like a couple hours ago or whatever, right? And I hear footsteps upstairs. Mind you, no one is upstairs. No one's upstairs. It's just me in the house. Y'all, I hear someone going down the stairs upstairs and then coming down here. I thought my auntie's husband was upstairs. I did not think I was in the house entirely alone. So my auntie called me and she was like, oh, do you want something from the store, like Doritos? She asked me what Doritos did I want. As I'm talking to my auntie, I hear footsteps again upstairs. And I was like, oh, where's everyone at? And he just starts going down the list of where everyone is. And then I say, so no one's in the house with me? She says, no. My heart drops. So I go, I run and I go get the Bible because y'all, I could not make this up. Hold up. This just dropped all the way down here and rolled. I just rolled it up so y'all can see when it's on here, there's no falling because it's like scrunches. So there's, y'all, anyways, we're ignoring that. Back to the story time. But yeah, so I call my auntie and, I go get the Bible. And I'm just sitting there and I'm praying and I put my head under the cover, y'all, because This ghost not gonna get me. I don't know what's in here. Y'all, tell me freaking why. The baby, my auntie's baby, he has this little walker thing. And I literally heard like from one of the toys rattling. That was like 3 steps away from my current position. I freaking freaked out. I had my head under the covers, like I wasn't freaking moving. Like that was one of the moments where my heart dropped. Okay, mind you, this has happened to me before, but in different types of settings. I was here home alone one time and I was sleeping and I kind of had like a bad dream, right? So I like shook myself out of the bad dream and then like I closed my eyes again, but I put my head under the covers and I closed my eyes again and then I heard like the baby's toy rattling again. That situation happened before this current situation. So because of my nails, I can't really click, but I had to hang up on my auntie because she was just making it worse. And I called my grandma and I told my grandma like everything that was going on, and she told me that it's okay, she's gonna like pray over when she gets back. Y'all, I literally did not move until someone came back. I left out something. The door freaking opened, like this door opened when I heard the footsteps, just kept opening and closing. So I think it's time for me to go.
I'd just finished university and had a new job in a big town. I was desperate to live on my own after sharing a uni house with 6 other people. I was just about to give up and go for yet another house share when I came across an amazing looking 1-bedroom flat, which was actually £100 below my budget. I thought it was too good to be true, but I booked an appointment to see it. Well, it was even better than I could have imagined. It was on the top floor of a massive old house that had been converted into flats. It had huge windows, high ceilings, original fireplaces, the works. Oh. And the best part was a quirky small room off the main living room. It was a small room with its own almost floor-to-ceiling window which overlooked the massive park at the back of the house. Unable to believe my luck, I signed the tenancy and within a week, I'd moved in. I worked hard to make the space my own and my favourite room was that little one. I put all my books in there, plus a big, squishy love seat. All was well for a few weeks. I did hear a few odd sounds, but that's to be expected living in such an old house, right? Then, one evening, everything changed. I was sat in my book nook. The sun was setting, splashing pink and orange tones across the sky. I was staring dreamily out across the park when I heard a faint click, and the door to the inbuilt cupboard to my left softly opened. Without thinking much of it, I pushed it closed. 2 minutes later, there was another click, and the door opened again. Once again, I shut it. I was starting to feel a bit unsettled. The sun was almost completely set, so I was about to head to the kitchen to make dinner when the cupboard door suddenly flew open and banged against the edge of my love seat. I jumped a mile. My brain was still fixed on it, being an old drafty house where these things happen, when I suddenly saw it. A hand was holding the door from the other side.
Jesus.
I could see 4 visible, long, white fingers. I snapped my head back to look out the window. I blinked. I looked back and the hand was still there. Out of nowhere, my grandmother's voice was in my head. As a child, she'd always told me scary stories, usually with a laugh at the end when she'd made me jump. But every now and again, she would say in a serious voice, "Darling, sometimes there are entities that wish you harm. They want to latch onto you and stay with you. If you see one, you mustn't look directly at it. You mustn't acknowledge it, otherwise you'll belong to it." Okay, don't look at it, don't speak to it, got it. I felt the temperature in the room dropping as the last crescent of sun dipped below the trees. My breath caught as I heard a noise. Faint at first, but getting louder. In the blurred reflection from the window, I caught a glimpse of movement. Steeling myself, I kept my head completely still and slid my eyes sideways. The long, thin fingers were slowly drumming on the door. I snapped my eyes back to the front. Another movement reflected in the window. I looked sideways again and watched in horror as a man slowly leaned around the door so that his head and shoulders were visible. He was dressed in a pinstripe jacket with a white shirt, wearing a bowler hat. His eyes were in shadow and his mouth, it was turned up in a smile that was too wide for his face, his lips reaching up to his cheeks like the Joker but without makeup. Oh my God. I was careful not to react, but every hair I had was stood on end. Another noise, scratching. In the now dark window I could see the cause. The man was slowly running one finger up and down the cupboard door. His eyes still on me, still grinning that terrible grin. I have no idea how long I sat there, maybe an hour, and all the time he stared, grinned and scratched. Eventually, my eyes found the photo of my grandmother on the large windowsill among my candles and knickknacks. What else has she said in those serious moments? Don't acknowledge it, yes, but what else? It was almost like she'd been preparing me for this moment, like she knew that one day I'd have to face whatever this is. Yeah, I remembered what to do, but, oh God, I was going to have to turn my back on that thing. Slowly, I got up from my chair. I moved to the windowsill and lit the candles. I could feel its eyes on my back as I moved. I just knew that it had slowly turned its head to follow me. I thought of my grandmother and said aloud, "My home is a place of light and love, no darkness is welcome here." The scratching stopped, but the man stared at me. Slowly, I looked to the side again and saw its face. Its mouth was slowly turning down at the edges until it made an exaggerated sad face, almost like a theatre tragedy mask.
Oh my God.
I looked up, back to the window, and then slowly the cupboard door closed and it shut with a soft click. I never sat in my book nook again. I left the flat as soon as my contract was up. Every now and then I've seen it pop up on Rightmove and Gumtree, always cheaper and cheaper than before. Lots of love.
I used to do house calls in the hills of the Appalachian Mountains, sometimes in places so desolate that my patients didn't even have electricity or running water, and I would sometimes have to use a map and the compass of my car to navigate to these places. The company I used to work for, it no longer exists. I still do house calls, but I work mainly in the city now, but I do cover 3 states, and all of my stories are changed for HIPAA and for the sake of storytelling, minorly when I have to, because I don't want you to know who these people are. I don't want to get in trouble. So listen. This actually came to the forefront of my mind today because a friend of mine was talking about living a life of organized crime and joking about how great it would be to just like retire at 35 if we could find the right gig. And first of all, I'd never make it in jail because I've got a loud mouth and a fat ass. But it reminded me of this story, okay? So there's one time I was doing house calls in the city, and this was one of the first times, like this was just in the beginning of me transitioning from working like literally Appalachia, middle of nowhere, to working in like inner city. So it was a transition. It was a little bit of a culture shock at times. Just like for some people learning about like the Amish, it's a very interesting thing you didn't know about. A lot of things in the inner city were like that too. I was like, oh, I would have never thought of that. Well, anyways, okay. So I'm doing a visit with one of the young gentlemen in the home, and he's a very kind, well-spoken young man. We kind of got into talking about what he does for work, and he basically said that he was in sales and he traveled a lot, and he also got to meet all kinds of different people. He was very vague about, you know, what he did. And he was asking me about like where I traveled to and the kinds of places I was at. And it was very interesting because I was like, you know, we're often in the same area now that I'm working in the inner city. Like, it's so crazy. We do a lot of business in the same neighborhoods. And so I had asked him, like, what kind of sales are you in? And he was just like, oh, you know, this and that. So then he had asked, like, are you interested in making like some... Can you please stop? Can you please stop? Every time I try to film something, you do this. And I'm stop, okay? Leave it off or leave it on. Fine, leave it off. So I'm talking to him about my job and the different communities I go. Seriously, stop, please. Like, there's no reason for this. So are you just gonna do that every time I look at the camera? Do you think you're funny? Because you're not, and you're messing with the filter on my face. Anyway, so I'm talking to him about, I'm just gonna ignore her. I'm talking to him about, ooh, did you hear that? Stop! Ugh. So anyways, I'm talking to him about the different places that I go to, and he goes, do you want to make a little extra money on the side? And I'm like, oh, well, like, what kind of company do you work for? And he was like, well, really, I'm self-employed. So I distribute a product that I pick up. I distribute a product that I pick up in Michigan after it's moved to the United States. And they're distributed to us from a gentleman. Then it's distributed to me and 2 other people. And then we move it into this area of the community. And then we distribute our product to different people, and they distribute it amongst them. And I'm like, oh, that's like so interesting. Like, what kind of products are you guys like? You're selling vacuums, right? And it ends up he was a substance dealer. He was dealing in illegal substances, and it was very interesting to hear about how the entire organization worked. He literally told me how they're moving it in from outside of the United States to like a location where they'd all meet. They would distribute the product and move it through different parts of the state so that it would never be, what's the word for it? So, like, I can't focus because she keeps turning the damn lights on. Yes, I'm talking about you. So that it would never be intercepted by the police. And I was like, well, first of all, I work in healthcare and I take an oath to do no harm, and I take that very seriously. And I feel like moving these substances into the neighborhoods that I'm trying to improve. Would you please stop? Now the sign on my thing is moving. I feel like moving the substances into the neighborhoods that I'm trying to improve, it would be counterproductive. It could hurt somebody, and for that reason, I certainly cannot be involved. Also, I can't go to prison. Like, look at me. I am not going to make it. I don't know when to shut up. So it would not go well for me. I also have 2 children and a husband, so prison's just kind of out of the question. But he was very nice about it. He just said he thought it would be perfect because I'm going to all of these different neighborhoods. It was very unlikely that I would be suspected by the police to be moving these substances because I was white and a woman, and because of the job that I do. So he thought I would have been a really great mule. What a compliment. He actually started to talk about money, and I was like, listen, I can tell you right now, I'm out. Like, this is just not something that I morally, ethically, or legally can do. So for all those reasons, I would not like to be considered for the position opening. But he did start talking about money, and there are days where I'm just sitting around thinking, man, I could be retired. But you never really know who you're going to see when you do my job. People walk from all paths of life, and the most important thing is they all get treated equally by me. I'm able to provide them with an excellent amount of education about their healthcare. I learn about all different kinds of people and how they live and how they make money and how they support themselves. And I also do my best to try to redirect people to community resources, so maybe they don't feel like they have to seek out these sort of desperate ways of covering their bills financially. Can you please stop? Girl. So you know how I had said that I frequently try to film, but it just doesn't really happen because I'm constantly having interruptions, nosebleed, TV turning on and off, the lights are going crazy. I posted about the lights one other time and a bunch of people made fun of me and they were like, oh, maybe it's the storm. Girl, I was filming the storm outside, which is why I actually caught it. Like, otherwise, I'm not usually filming when it happens. I usually just blow it off, like, whatever. But she's getting so rowdy lately, and I don't know why. I would love to get something more on camera for you, but I can't. There was actually I don't want to say can you please stop? I don't want to say a mist, but there was like a cloud in my bathroom a couple of days ago, and like I could see it kind of moving around the bathroom. Hang on, I just need I could see it kind of hovering in the bathroom and like moving the shower curtain a little bit, but I did film it and you can't see anything. Like, there's nothing there. So every once in a while I think like, well, maybe I'm crazy, but then, you know, I turn on my phone to film a TikTok and this is my life. You're lucky I don't have seizures because this is, can you stop? Stop. Stop. You know what? We're going to call it a night. I'm so glad that I got to talk to you guys. I know this wasn't a spooky story, but I hope that my house ghost aggravating me routinely provides you with the spooky that you need tonight. She also took my horsehair and threw it on the counter. So there's my horsehair, and she just, boop, threw it on the sink, which now I'm going to have to collect these million little strands of horsehair that she just threw onto the sink and the floor. Nothing really there. Anywho, have an amazing evening, guys.
Imagine being 17, getting your first apartment for only $100, and not even being asked to pay the first or the last month's rent. What's up, cousins? So we're back with another story time. Just like any other time, let's not waste no time and let's get into it. Okay, so for this story, we're gonna call her Rose. So Rose was 17 years old and she was working, she was in school, she had 2 kids, so she's ready to move out of her mom's place and get her own apartment. So after applying for these apartments, literally the next day, one of the managers of those apartments called her and told her, bring me a $100 deposit right now, you can move in. She didn't even ask for the first month's rent, the last month's rent, nothing. And then she's only 17, so she's not even thinking of it. All she can think of, I got $100, I'm about to go get this apartment. So Rose met with the manager. The manager gave her the keys. Rose gave her the $100. She had no furniture or nothing because she was so eager to get out of her mom's place. So Rose moved in, a couple days go by, everything is normal. So she ended up inviting one of her friends over because her friend is dating her brother at the time. So the friends stay over. Now the next morning when the friend walks into Rose's room, Rose says she looked a little off. And the friend told her that she had something in her apartment. So Rose like, what do you mean? So the friend's like, you have something in here like a ghost or something. And Rose like, nah, like you tripping. So the friend told Rose that she was in the kitchen and she was cooking breakfast. She was making some eggs. So she's finna season the eggs with some salt. As she picks up the salt, something pushes the salt out of her hand. So Rose like, nah, it was probably oil like on the salt, like on the container of the salt, and it just slipped out of your hand. Rose brushes it off. She paid no mind to it. So a couple days later, it's Rose, her brother, and her brother girlfriend at the house once again. They're in the living room, they're watching TV, and then something hits the back of the wall. So the couch that they're sitting on is in front of the wall that just got hit with something. And above them is a big picture frame. Now it's 3 pictures that make one big picture frame. And she said when whatever hit this wall, the picture frames on the end, so the one on the left side, the one on the right side, started swaying back and forth. There's nobody in the house with them and they all sitting on the couch. So Rose is trying to convince herself maybe just something fell in the other room and it caused this to happen. Some time go by, Rose started dating a guy. So the guy would come over, every now and then, spend a night with her. So this particular night, he spends the night with her, they end up falling asleep. When they fall asleep, they're back to back. So he's facing the door and Rose is facing this wall that has a long window. So as she wakes up, she said when she turns around, she see a silhouette standing there and it just scared her. But she didn't want to make too much movement because she didn't want this man that was standing there to realize that she notices him. So she ended up nudging her boyfriend, telling him to wake up, letting him know like, hey, something's in here with us. He told her to get up and turn on the light. Yeah, she looked at him like he was crazy. So he ended up getting up and turning on the light. They see nothing or no one in the room. And at this time, she had only been living in the spot for 2 months. So they get back in the bed, they end up falling asleep. Now when she wakes up, she notices that her closet door is open, but she knows every night before she goes to sleep, she closes this closet door. But every morning she wakes up, it's open. So she just comes to the conclusion like maybe the latch is loose and that's why it keeps opening up. So a couple days go by and Rose is woken up because her 3-year-old daughter is screaming. So she ran into the room, she see her daughter in the corner crying, saying, "Mama, tell the blue lady to get out, 'cause she just bit me." So Rose is like, what? She turns on the lights, no one's there. So in her mind, she's saying that her daughter probably had a nightmare. So her daughter was like, she bit my finger. So Rose went and looked at her daughter's finger and it's red. So Rose ended up telling her daughter that it was just a bad dream. So fast forward, her son is only 2 years old and he couldn't really talk or enunciate words at this time. But she said it would be numerous occasions where she would catch him in the closet baby talking with something. So one day she said she had left her front door open because she had just burned something. So she's letting all this smoke and smell out of the house. Her son and daughter was sitting in the living room watching TV. She went to go use the bathroom. She came back. Her son was not there. So she's panicking at this point. She's looking everywhere. She can't find him. She's eventually about to call the cops until she hears baby talking coming from her daughter's room. Now she walks into the room. It's dark. There's no lights on. And she hear her son baby talking in the closet. She opened the closet door and she see her son sitting in the corner as if someone is cradling him and he's just happy and he's just baby talking. So at this point, Rose ended up calling her mom, telling her mom hey, it's some creepy stuff going on in this house. My daughter keeps saying that she see a blue lady. My son, he's baby talking in the closet with something. Can you come over? Rose mom come over. She's ended up talking and playing with the kids. So Rose mom asks her daughter hey baby, where do you see the blue lady at? So the little girl walked into her room and pointed at her little toddler bed and was right there, grandma, right there. So the grandmother walks up into the bed and pretend she's talking to the blue lady and telling her to get out of the room. So she ended up telling Rose's daughter she's gone, she's no longer here. The daughter turns around and says, no grandma, she's still there. So her grandma is where? Show me. The little girl walked over to her little toddler bed, lifts it up and tell her,
She's right there. So Rose is just thinking maybe it's just her daughter's imagination. All right, y'all, this video is getting a little long and there's more to the story than this. So I'm going to be making a part 2. Until then, guys, enjoy this story. Like, comment, repost. If you guys have any spooky story that you want to share to me, make sure you DM it to me or send it to the email that's in my bio. Comment part 2. It's coming up. What's up, cousins? So I am back with parts 2 of Rose's story. So again, let's not waste no time and let's get into it. Okay, so we left off with Rose telling her mom and her grandmother where the blue lady was. So fast forward, Rose's boyfriend parents are throwing a party for New Year's, so they end up attending the party. So while they're at the party, it's like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Rose says she get this eerie feeling they need to leave like right now. So the boyfriend is like, okay, one more drink. And she's like, no, we need to go. So they go home. When they get home, her house was completely broken into and everything was just flipped over and ran through. And she said she knew that's why she had the feeling to leave this party. So she calls the cops. The cops come over. They're doing the report. And it's 2 of them that come over. So one of the cops looks at the other cop and says, remember that story that I told you? He's like, it happened here. So Rose like, hold on, what you mean what story? What happened here? So she just kept asking like, what happened? What went on? So he's like, if I tell you, you really wouldn't be able to sleep at night. And she's like, what? You gotta tell me because I'm living here. So the cop is just not telling her what happened. So they was gonna leave and Rose was like, hey, can I ask you a question? The cop was like, yeah. And she was like, does it have anything to do with a lady? So the cop's like, what lady? So Rose like, the blue lady. So the other partner ended up smacking the cop with the report papers and was like, yeah, I'm getting the fuck out of here. So the cop is like, okay, I'll tell you, but show me where your daughter sees this blue lady at. So one of the cops come in the house. She walks him to her daughter's room and tells him that she either sees the lady in the closet or under her bed. So she ends up walking over to the closet, opening the closet, and she said the cop looks so confused. So he's like, do you mind taking me to your room? So as they walk into her room, she's like, what's going on? So he goes to her closet, opens up her closet, and asks her, do you ever see anything in here? So she's like, no, but I see like ghost people, or every morning that I wake up, my closet is open. So the cop's like, it's interesting that you said that. So the cop is like, this closet opened up by itself. So Rose is like, yeah, but maybe the latch is just loose. The cop said, no, let me tell you what happened. The cop said that he hasn't been a police officer for too long, only a few years, but the reason why he would never forget this case because it was his first major case. So the cop said this happened less than a year ago. Mind you, by this time, Rose had already been in the apartment for 4 months. So the cop said he ended up getting a call to come to a crime scene. Now he said before you moved in here, you didn't even have this wall that was in the closet right here. It was just a big walk-in closet. The cop said before you moved in, it was a lady, her husband, and their 6 kids. Now, the woman ended up finding out that the husband was cheating on her, so she came home from work to confront him. So when the wife confronted her husband, he ended up flipping around on her and telling her that he's leaving her, he's taking the kids, he doesn't want to be with her anymore. So he took the kids and he left. So when the husband ended up leaving, the wife ended up going into the closet, and it was a metal rod in the closet, and she ended up hanging herself. The cop said when he got to the crime scene, she was a woman of color, but however, her body was completely blue. So when Rose told the cops that her daughter had saw a blue lady, that's why he got freaked out. So they're walking out and the cop's like, hey, ask your daughter where she's at right now. So Rose like, hey, baby, where's the blue lady at? So her daughter said, Mama, she not here no more. So Rose said, well, where did she go, baby? And her daughter said, her went in the fire already. Rose said her mouth just dropped. She said from that point on, she believed any and everything that her kids said that they see. Okay, so again, y'all, if you guys have any spooky stories that you want to send to me, make sure you DM it to me or you can send it to the email that's in my bio. Until then, y'all, like, share, comment, repost, reshare. Enjoy this video. I will see y'all later.
The house I grew up in, the previous owner hung himself in the backyard from the storage shed, and I think he used to try to talk to me in my dreams. If you're new here, I tell scary stories a lot of times that have happened to me in my life, and most of them, I believe, were the spirit of this man that was very unhappy with his life. So this dream that I would have would be that I would go outside to check the mailbox like my family would make me do, and I spent a lot of time at home alone. I was like a latchkey kid, if you know that term. And I'd spend a lot of time at home alone, and in this dream I would go outside to check the mailbox, and when I would turn around from checking the mailbox, he would be standing in my house looking at me out of the window blinds. And if I would go to the front door, he would be at the front door. We had a glass front door, and he'd be on the other side of the glass front door. And he was just staring at me with like this solemn look where he would just kind of be leaning his head almost against the glass. And his body was real dark, like it was like the shadow of him, not like him really. And what's funny is I never knew what this guy looked like, and I saw a photo of him later, and my dream pretty much hit it right on the head, which is pretty wild. And I'm getting chills talking about this out here in the dark, all alone, underneath a full moon. It's a beautiful night. And no matter what window or door I would go to try to get back into my house, he would just be there. And he had only said one thing in this whole dream, and I had this dream multiple times. And he only said one thing ever, and it was, "This is my house. Who are you?" That was it. That's all he ever said to me. That storage shed was tore down the second we moved in, because we knew why we were getting to move in there. It's because the previous owner checked out early. And our dogs, we used to keep our dogs in the backyard where the shed was, and they didn't have access to that part of the yard, but I would take them out on walks. And every time we would pass that spot, I'm looking out of the corner of my eye here because every time I look at the camera, I swear I see a shadow moving over there on the left side. Right out of that bush on the left. But anyhow, every time my dogs would walk past that spot, about once a week, I shouldn't say every time, about once a week when they'd walk by that spot, they would have their haunches up and their hair would be standing up, and they would show their teeth and they would growl and they would look up at the sky. And I remember what the storage shed looked like, and where they would be looking up, I would have to imagine would be looking right at his face if he was still there hanging. I've always thought they could see something I couldn't see, or at least I couldn't see while I was awake. Hope no one tries to talk to you in your dreams tonight. It makes for a pretty sleepless night. That's why I'm out here strolling, I guess. Maybe he went in there. Bet you thought something spooky was going to happen.
A series of spooky stories except for its woman's intuition. I don't know what this is called, but back somewhere last year I had a dream of one of my cousins getting unalived on the street late at night. I seen the way that he was on the ground and everything. I kept thinking on the stream and I kept trying to pull my brother from the street life. Christmas of last year came in the morning of something telling me to call my brother, so I did. 2 times, no answer. A few minutes later my mom and aunties called, screaming, yelling, and telling me that my brother was unalive. And sure enough, my dream was everything that happened that day. And to this day I think about it, because when I talk to people about it, everybody around me makes me feel crazy or tried to make me feel like it never happened. When I was 12 or 13, my parents decided to take me and my 3 brothers to the downtown Glendale library called Velma T. At first, I was blissfully unaware of my surroundings, just doing what a normal kid would do and browse through the books, but something in my gut told me to be more observant. So I did, and I noticed this disheveled-looking man wearing a white muscle tank top with greasy, medium, long black hair, tan skin, and a beer belly. At first, I didn't think anything of it and continued on about my business, but after walking away from the manga section where my brothers were, because I didn't find anything interesting, I decided to look at the novels. Unfortunately, the area I had gone was empty. Everyone was toward the front. Although it was quiet where I was, I subtly glanced around, and not enough to arouse suspicion, but enough to gaze my surroundings and find that same guy was still following me. So I immediately ran back to where my brothers were, but the guy still followed and nobody but me was aware of what was going on. So my next idea was to lose him and find my parents. Thankfully, I was able to throw him off and I found my parents at the checkout checking out their books. Before the man could find me again, I quickly ran over to them and slid between them to hide. Glancing towards the main entrance while they were checking out, I saw the man walk past towards the kids section of the library, I assumed to see if I was over there. Thankfully, after he was out of sight, my parents finished checking out and we all headed back to the car. After getting everyone back in, I watched the same man from the front car window exit the library. We pulled out of the parking lot and never went back. To this day, I believe I was almost abducted in broad daylight. I never told my parents what happened, but I certainly will never forget that day or listen to that voice in my head. This happened in my early 20s when cell phones were fairly new and not many people had them. I didn't know how to drive and would take public transportation everywhere. The bus stop was about half a mile from my house, and on this day everyone left early, and I rode the bus to school since I had a late start class. I walked to the bus stop, and while waiting, a car drove up and slowed down as it passed by. It turned to my street and did a U-turn and stopped next to me. Asked if I needed a ride. I said no, and he drove off. Then he came back and was more insistent, but I said no again. He became more aggressive, and I began to feel scared, but another car was coming, so he drove off again. The bus stop was right next to the freeway, and there was not very many businesses. There was also a wooded area right across the street. Not many cars tended to pass by, and the look he gave me left me unsettled, and I felt that I needed to get out of there or hide. And I was not going in the woods. That's a good decision. Luckily, he had gone straight on the feeder road, and I knew that it would take him a couple of minutes to make it back around. I ran straight home and made it to my house just in time. I peeked out the window and saw the car drive past my house just seconds after. He drove by a couple more times before giving up. To this day, I'm glad that I listened to my intuition, because if I had hesitated, I would have either ran into him or he would have seen which house I ran into. Years ago, I was home on vacation from uni. The one Friday, my mom called me to pick her up earlier from work because she felt like it. So I left home earlier than I would have, and not even half an hour after I left, 5 robbers from a local syndicate broke down our front door with a hammer. They were armed with assault rifles and something similar. I would have been there had my mom not phoned me. Oh my god. It's not super crazy, but back in August of 25, I was with my cousin hanging out with our uncle. We usually didn't get to stay too long because he was very high energy, and it made us, me specifically, very overstimulated. But this day, all I wanted to do was stay with us. My cousin kept asking to leave, but I just kept saying wait. The next day/night, he died very suddenly and unexpectedly. I truly believe something in my body knew that we needed to stay with him. Come back for another part.
You know, at night when you have to turn the lights off in your house and you get to that last light and you switch it off and it's completely dark, and it feels like all of a sudden your house has now become the most haunted house in the world, and you have to make a run all the way back to your bedroom. There might be something to that. Now, when we are doing this, right, we put ourselves in a vulnerable position. And I think anything negative, any kind of spirit that is a negative entity knows this. This is the best time to scare us. And they're trying to see if they could scare us just a little bit to gain entry and to allow them permission to come into our lives. So this is a story I heard out of Rockford, Illinois. There was this girl, and she lived in this bigger house all alone. And it started to get late. She wanted to go to bed. So she starts going through her house, turning off all the lights. She gets to the last light, which is in the living room. And when she hits it off and it goes completely dark, she gets that feeling. Well, she walks through her living room, and as she walks past her kitchen, she turns and kind of glances in, and she sees a woman, like in a white gown, just standing in the kitchen. And she's like, "Who are you? What do you want?" And the woman just starts walking towards her. So she takes off running to her bedroom. She closes her door, locks it, and she calls the police. The police show up, and she says, "Come inside, like there's a woman in my house. I'm in my bedroom, locked in there. I don't want to come out." So they go through her house, they search it, they don't find anyone. And they said, "Ma'am, are you sure you didn't just see something? Like, are you just tired and maybe there was like a hallucination?" And she goes, "No, I'm for sure there was a woman in my kitchen." So they said, "Well, we can't find anything. You probably are just tired. Why don't you just go to bed?" So they leave, and she goes back up to her bedroom. And when she lays down in bed, she kind of feels like, you know what, maybe that was just, in my head. Maybe I'm just tired and I need to get some sleep. So as she turns around to adjust herself in the bed, there is the woman standing right next to her. And she jumps up, she runs out of her house, and she said as she's in the front of her house, she can see the woman looking out of her window, staring at her.
According to a follower named Savannah, she volunteered to restore a nearly 200-year-old plantation, and she expected old floors and, yeah, of course, maybe some old ghost stories to go along with it. But what she didn't expect was something to speak to her while she was alone there one night. And before I tell this story, as always, there's no way for me to verify what she experienced. This is simply the account that she sent me, and even half of it is true. If it is, I completely understand why she refuses to be there alone after dark. Now, Savannah told me that she's always been fascinated by history, not because she romanticizes it in any way, but because she believes the past should be remembered exactly as it happened, no matter how uncomfortable it may be for some people. And that's why in her spare time, she volunteers restoring old cemeteries and historical sites. And about 2 years ago, she joined a historical foundation restoring a plantation outside of modern-day Florence, Alabama. And she said the property is unlike anywhere that she's ever been before. The moment you pass through the front gate, the world absolutely changes. It's not just that it becomes quiet, it's the kind of silence that feels unnatural, is what she said. The sounds of modern life absolutely disappear the moment you pass in it. And, there's no distant traffic, there's no birds, no wind, it's just silence, you and history. She said it honestly feels like you've stepped backward into the 1820s, and that the property doesn't want you to remember what year it really is. And now, then came Christmas of 2024. The plantation was hosting a holiday festival that brought in well over 1,000 visitors across several nights. And by closing time, everyone had left, and Savannah was doing one final walkthrough of the upstairs to make sure that the old house was secure. Certain rooms were locked and, blocked off so guests couldn't get in there. There wasn't even electricity running through the building, just moonlight and silence. And as she climbed the staircase, she suddenly heard what sounded like a man clearing his throat in one of the upstairs bedrooms. And she actually smiled and assumed someone had maybe stayed behind after closing. So she walked back toward the room, already preparing to politely tell the visitor that, the house was closed and, they were done for the evening and they were going to have to leave. But when she stepped inside, it was completely empty. Every corner, every closet, there was no one. And she just laughed it off. I mean, what else can you do in that moment, right? And maybe she was exhausted. Yeah, maybe between work, school, family, volunteering. Her brain was absolutely fried, probably just playing tricks on her. Then, as she was turning to leave, a younger voice quietly spoke from somewhere inside of that very same room that she was in. And all it said was, "Can you please stay?" Didn't shout, not like a whisper from outside, couldn't have been mistaken with somebody else. It sounded like someone standing only a few feet away from her in that very room. And Savannah said every hair on her body stood up all at once. She didn't even look back. She just bolted down the staircase. She said she grabbed her purse, slammed the heavy front door shut, locked it, and practically ran across the front lawn to her car. Then, halfway across the yard, she got this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching her from somewhere. And it was the kind of feeling that's so strong your body reacts before your mind can even have time to comprehend what's happening. Your body just knows. And she stopped, turned around, and looked back at the house, and one upstairs window immediately caught her attention. And standing inside of the top right bedroom was a figure, clear as day, completely still, just watching her. And she said she didn't stop to zoom in or investigate or anything. She simply just pulled out her phone and she snapped a quick picture. And she got in her car and left. Now, she attached the photograph that she took when she emailed me this story, and I will post it right here. Oddly enough, she told me she's never actually been harmed there. It's not like an uncomfortable feeling. In fact, she's had other experiences that felt strangely comforting, almost like protective, like a family member is how she put it. But this one night was completely different. Whatever I'd asked her to say was enough to convince her of one thing. She has never ever returned to that plantation alone again after dark. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Did you guys know there's a window in Italy that has remained perpetually open for over 500 years? And yeah, you better believe there's a ghost story behind it. If you ever find yourself in Florence, take a walk to the Piazza Santissima Annunziata. There, you'll find a beautiful Renaissance palazzo. Formerly the home of the Florentine Grifoni family, the Palazzo Grifoni Budini Gatti was built in the mid-16th century and has the distinction of boasting the only exposed red brick edifice in all of Florence. Charmed by its stately old-world beauty, you might not even notice this small but singularly strange detail. At the far right corner of the uppermost floor, there is a window with a partially open jalousie shutter. At a glance, it looks like any of the other windows that grace the red brick facade. But unlike its counterparts, you will never see this window closed. In fact, according to local tradition, it has not been closed since the late 1500s, for fear of provoking La Donna Grifoni. The legend tells of a young bride who married into the Grifoni family near the end of the 16th century. Almost immediately after the wedding, the newlyweds were separated when the groom was called off to war. The young bride sat at the window to watch her husband depart, and there she remained, to wait for his return. Every day she gazed out over the piazza, hoping to catch a glimpse of her beloved riding home. Then came the terrible news. Her husband had fallen in battle. Donna Grifoni refused to believe it. After all, she would know it, would sense it if her beloved had departed this world. So she kept her steadfast vigil at the window and waited. Weeks turned into months, months to years. Gradually her youth faded, but her resolve never did. She spent the rest of her life at that window, watching the piazza, waiting for a return that would never come. She died in that room, still gazing out the window. After her death, her family at last closed the shutters. And according to every version of the story that has come down to us, the moment the window was closed, something inside the room responded with a violence that terrified the household. Books flew from the shelves, furniture moved across the floor, paintings fell from the walls. The disturbances did not stop until the window was reopened. It has remained open ever since, through 5 centuries of Florentine history, through summer heat and winter storms, through renovations and changes of ownership. Since 1890, the palazzo has been owned by the Budini Gatti family, who still take care to ensure that the window remains open to this day. While this bit of ghosty folklore isn't particularly groundbreaking or harrowing in and of itself, I have to say that when I first encountered the story, I felt a vague chill run down my spine. Because aside from being quietly creepy, the story was also familiar, featuring a trope that belongs to a long and haunting folkloric tradition. You see, there's a whole grammar of grief in European folk practice that is organized around the idea of arrested time and motion, objects that must be stopped, paused, closed, or kept open at the moment of death. One of the most familiar examples of this trope is the tradition of stopping all the clocks in a house when someone dies. Documented across most of Europe from the Renaissance onward, this popular folk practice originates out of the belief that mechanical time must be suspended in a house that has witnessed death, that the clock's continued motion would somehow trap the soul or disturb its passage. Another variation of the tradition, and one which I use to full effect in my second book, Echoes in Glass, out 2027, involves mirrors. There's an old belief that when a death occurs, all nearby mirrors must be covered, because the reflected motion of the living world is thought to be dangerous, diverting, or disorienting for the souls of the dead. Faced with their own reflection, or the mirrored backwards image of a place they knew in life, the spirit may become bewildered, lost, even trapped. So the mirrors are covered, their ability to reflect arrested until the soul departs and the danger passes. There are variants of this logic throughout European folk practice. Windows or doors that must be opened or unlocked at the moment of death so that the soul can pass through. Candles that must not be extinguished until dawn. Meals that must be left on tables for a set number of days. Beds left unmade, chairs kept in the exact position the deceased last used them. The underlying logic is consistent. Death is understood as an interruption of the usual order, preventing the completion of something that would have otherwise been completed by the deceased. The living respond by refusing to complete other things, by keeping objects in a state of stasis, performing rituals intended to slow or pause the normal passage of time, hitting the metaphorical pause button so that the whole household is, for a period, arrested along with the dead. The window at Palazzo Grifoni is that logic made permanent. Because most arrested time and motion rituals have an end. The clocks are restarted after the funeral. The mirrors are uncovered. The candles are eventually allowed to gutter out. The household observes the necessary pause and returns to ordinary time. But unlike other instances of the tradition, the Grifoni window never emerged out of that suspension. And I think that's what made this particular legend so creepy to me. What the legend describes, a window open for a specific purpose that was never fulfilled, and that must remain in that open state forever, is a folk ritual that has escaped its usual temporal container. The waiting was not completed. The beloved did not return. And so the window cannot resume its ordinary function of closing, because to close it would enact a completion the story cannot allow. The window is haunted by the interrupted action, the arrested reach toward a resolution that will never come. That is a very old type of logic. It shows up in variations across European storytelling. In every fairy tale that features a person turned to stone mid-gesture, or is put to sleep for an unnaturally prolonged period of time. In every legend that speaks of a bell that must never be rung, a spinning wheel that must never stop, a clock that must never be restarted, or a door that must never be opened. The Palazzo Grifoni window is one of the most physically enduring examples we have of that old folk logic. A specific piece of Renaissance architecture that has been quietly suspended for half a millennium because a widow's watch was never allowed to end. The death of the Grifoni groom was the devastating interruption of what was meant to be the beginning of a shared life. To counteract this breach of order, the bride suspended her own life, choosing to remain in a state of stasis outside of ordinary time. And, if you believe legend, not even her own death could interrupt her vigilant watch. That, I think, is the quiet horror of this story and others like it. Some interrupted actions do not resolve. Some windows do not close.
My uncle took this photo just seconds after a car accident on the highway. While everyone was checking the damage, no one noticed anything unusual. Days later, when they zoomed in on the picture, they spotted a motionless figure standing next to the truck. The strangest part is that none of the witnesses remember seeing anyone there. Some say it was just a bystander. Others believe that in places where death comes close, not everyone present is still alive. This photo was taken at a castle in Scotland, and Christopher, the photographer, swears that nobody was there when he took the photo. It is said that the place where this human figure is photographed is inaccessible to ordinary tourists, and there's a stone wall behind it that prevents entry. Nobody is allowed to go in there, and the figure even looks like it's wearing old-fashioned clothing. The owner of this photo said that it was taken many years ago. She was watching her grandson and his friends playing in the courtyard with some other kids later in the evening. There were no other adults in the courtyard, but when she looked back at the photos that she took of the kids playing, she noticed there was a lady holding one of the children's hands walking with her. She has no idea who it could be.
Stories of kids seeing ghosts and stories of seeing unknown beings in your house both give me crazy chills, and I cannot wait to read both of these for you tonight. You know the drill. Grab a drink, grab a cozy blanket, and settle in while I tell you a scary story in my garden. After dark. Welcome to Ghosts in the Garden. This first story is very short and it was sent to me by Eliza. Our house is 113 years old, and when we first moved in, my daughter was just under 18 months. She would always point and say there were ghosts in the house, and then started walking around with her hands behind her back like an old man. Then one day, we were looking in the mirror, and she was pointing at herself, and then me, and then pointed to a different spot in the mirror where there was no one. She said, "Who's that girl?" That really scared me. Now, I sage the house regularly. The second story was sent to me by someone who wants to remain anonymous. I live in Iceland. I was about 5 years old when this first happened. I was always a very paranoid child and would have terrifying nightmares. This happened at about 3 a.m. I heard a noise outside of my bedroom door. I shared a room with my sister, but at that time she was sleeping over at a friend's house, so I was all alone. Of course I got scared, and I went to go to my parents' room and sleep. When I opened the door, though, there was this black figure standing right in front of my door. I slammed it so fast and went to hide under the covers. I didn't sleep any more that night. This wasn't the only time I saw this creature, though. I saw this creature again a year later. I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I had to walk past the kitchen to get to the bathroom, and I saw the creature sitting in one of the chairs in the kitchen. I ran as fast as I could to the bathroom, did my business, and then ran again as fast as I could back to my room. This wasn't the only time I saw this creature, though. I continued to see it every year, and sometimes many times a year. The weird thing is, though, when I moved away from this house, I haven't seen this creature since. I don't know what it was, but I like to think that it wasn't evil, or at least I like to hope that. What do you think that creature was she saw in her house? I have never seen a black figure, and especially not the same black figure over and over again in my home. And what would you do if your kid was saying they were seeing ghosts in the mirror when you were standing there? If my child was pointing to ghosts in the mirror, I think I would have to move out of my house. I don't think I could handle that at all. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you have your own story to send in, please feel free to email it to me. This was a short one tonight, But join me again tomorrow out in my garden after dark for another scary story. Bye.
There's a interesting story that comes out of Montana. Now, there was this woman who lived near the Pryor Mountains on the reservation. And one day she was at home with her 2 children. Now, her 6-month-old was in the bedroom with her on the floor on a blanket, and she was changing his diaper. And her other son, who was 4 years old, was in the living room. Well, as she is with the 6-month-old, she said out of the corner of her eye, she sees something run past the door really fast. It was about the same size as her 4-year-old son. And so she just thought like he was up to something. So she's like, I better get up and go check on him. So she gets up, she goes down the hallway. But when she comes in the living room, she notices that her son is on the couch and he's asleep. And so she's like, okay, well, what did I just see? Because it looked just like my son. Now, after this, she had several instances where she thought she would see her son run by, or she thought for a second she would catch a glimpse of her son standing around the corner. And then one night she was in bed and she was asleep, but she kind of was going in and out, and she had her eyes closed. And she said all of a sudden she started to hear what sounded like door creaking. And then as she turns over and she looked in the direction of the door, she said standing next to the doorway was what looked like her son. And so she said, what's wrong? Did you have a nightmare? Like, just come into the bed and you can sleep with mommy tonight. So she feels something get in the bed. She kind of feels like the pressure of the mattress moving down. And that's when she started to hear this weird kind of breathing, like this deep breathing. And she thought maybe something was wrong with her son. So she said when she turned over and she's like, honey, what's wrong? She looked and she said on the corner of the bed, standing kind of hunched over, staring at her, was this 3-foot man-like creature with this very large fat head, this skinny-like body, these very large black eyes. And she said it was just staring at her, making this loud breathing sound. And she started to scream. This thing jumped off the bed and it jumped out an open window and it took off running off into the distance. And she called her brother, who came over. They searched the property. They didn't find anything. But her brother looks at her and says, grandmother always told us about these things. These are the little people of the Pryor Mountain.
This was taken at my friend's funeral. I took a picture of the people lined up outside for my mom who couldn't make it. When I zoomed in to see if we knew anyone, we saw this. This photo was taken on New Year's Eve, but I don't remember the year. Early in the morning, we heard a lot of noises coming from the kitchen at my aunt's house. We kept saying it was just my cousin making the noises. It turns out that the times we were hearing these noises, he wasn't even home. Anyway, we tried to forget about it and took some pictures just trying to celebrate the day. In one of these pictures, I'm standing in front of the kitchen, and there seems to be a dark silhouette with eyes staring at us. That's when I realized this figure was probably the one making the noises in the kitchen. I'm so scared of this one. I live next to a rundown cemetery. I took this photo last year on November 2nd, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead. It was taken between midnight and 1 in the morning while I was in my kitchen. With my back turned, I suddenly felt chills. It was strange because it wasn't cold at all. I just felt a heavy sensation like I was being watched. When I turned around, I came face to face with this apparition.
How am I just now finding out about Miranda Cosgrove's deranged stalker, who had become so obsessed with her that he lit himself on fire in her front lawn? This happened back in 2016 when Miranda was just 23 years old, but the suspect's identity has never been released publicly. For 3 days leading up to the incident, this man had been sneaking onto Miranda's property, digging holes in her backyard, and burying multiple bizarre items like knives, a rope, a lunchbox, and even milk chocolate. Miranda says she has no idea why he buried these things, and to this day, no one has really been able to explain what they were for. Even though that was unclear, his intentions with Miranda were not. On the night of the incident, he mistook another woman for Miranda because she was driving a similar looking car, and he fired 6 shots at this random woman driving by. Thankfully, this woman was unharmed, but that just goes to show that this man was not planning on going out alone. He wanted to take Miranda with him. He then poured gasoline all over himself, lit himself on fire, and then fatally shot himself. Miranda was not home at the time this took place, but she has openly discussed how she's still traumatized by all of it. So much so to the point where she had to move back in with her parents for some time because she was afraid to be alone. And this is not the first time this girl has dealt with crazy stalkers. In 2014, a court-ordered restraining order was put in place against a man named Joshua Stockton, who had started to leave strange letters and gifts on Miranda's property. He basically told investigators that he was in love with her, hoped to marry her, and would rather die than be without her, and he actually threatened to end his own life by way of electrocution. He followed her into Disneyland, which ultimately broke the restraining order, and he was subsequently arrested, but that was not the end, because in 2017, a year after the man had taken his life on Miranda's property, Joshua restarted communication with Miranda via email, professing his undying love for her, and was then committed to a psychiatric hospital. Needless to say, this poor girl has been through it.
Hi, my name is Musica. I live in the Philippines, specifically in Baguio City, which is known for having a lot of scary stories and haunted places. Our old house was built in the late 1930s, and it belonged to my father's great-grandparents. Because of that, we always felt like a lot of the people who once lived there were still attached to it. Almost everyone who lived in or visited the house experienced something scary. My mom and I can both see spirits, and one of the scariest experiences happened to her. This took place one night when my dad was at work, and my mom and I were the only ones in the house. I was only 2 years old at the time, so I don't remember it myself, but my mom later told me what happened. According to her, it was around 1 or 2 in the morning. She had just gotten home from work, and I was already asleep because her sister had babysat me earlier and brought me home. My mom ate dinner and then went to her room to get ready for bed. After a while, she went to use the bathroom. While she was in there, she suddenly heard a girl humming. At first, she didn't think much of it, but a few minutes later, she heard it again. This time, the humming sounded much closer, as if the girl were standing just a few feet away on the other side of the door. Then it kept getting closer and closer. Her breaking point came when she heard the humming right behind her ear and felt as if someone was breathing on her. Terrified, she rushed out of the bathroom, went back to her room, and prayed until she eventually fell asleep. Years later, I had my own experience in that same house. I was around 7 years old at the time, walking home while my parents were still at work. When I arrived, the house was completely empty. I was the only one there. I went into my room to change my clothes, then headed to the sofa to watch TV. As I was turning the TV on, I saw an old woman standing behind me in the reflection of the screen. I quickly looked back, but there was nothing there. I got so scared that I went straight back to my room. After a few minutes, I heard something coming from the kitchen. It sounded like someone was stirring coffee with a spoon very aggressively. I knew no one else was in the house, so I started to panic and decided to go play outside with my friends instead. I stayed out there until my aunt came by, since she would bring me dinner every day. That experience wasn't the only strange encounter in that house. My dad's friend also had his own experience when my dad was still in college. My dad had some friends over at his house for a party, and one of his friends went to the kitchen to get something from the refrigerator. That's when he saw an old woman washing dishes. His friend quickly went back to my dad and asked him who the woman washing dishes was. My dad told him that his parents weren't home and his grandparents had already passed away, so there shouldn't have been any old woman in the house. They decided not to tell the others because they didn't want to scare everyone. The next day, they told my dad that as they were about to drive away from the house, they saw an old woman standing in the window, just staring at them as they backed up. They all saw her, so they sped up and left as fast as they could. We don't live in that house anymore because my parents sold it 6 years ago. The house was eventually demolished because the new owner wanted to turn the lot into a condominium.
The first photo that I'm going to show you was actually sent to me by one of you in my email, so thank you so much for sharing this with me. Also, I definitely see two entities in this photo, but the description only talks about one, so let me know what you see. This picture was taken at an old university many years ago. Behind the students was a woman dressed completely in black. When the school checked old attendance records and yearbooks, there was no record of her ever being a student or a teacher there. The strange part is that people who owned a copy of the photo claimed they would sometimes notice the woman appearing closer each time they looked at it. One former student refused to keep the photo in his house, saying he woke up several nights in a row feeling like somebody was standing at the foot of his bed. The university never officially explained the figure. Some believe it was just a trick of the camera. Others believe that the photo captured somebody who was never meant to be seen. It was around 2 in the morning and the street was completely empty. I took a photo because I thought it was strange that the door to that house was wide open, but I didn't think much of it. When I got home and looked at the picture, I saw a face peeking out from behind the gate. The worst part is that when I took the photo, I swear there was nobody there.
Good company and cozy, spooky, scary story time. As you can see, I got my hair done the other day. Shout out to my hairstylist. She's been doing my hair for 20 years already. Love that girl. Anyways, she knows that I love scary stories and that I tell scary stories on here. So she starts telling me what happened to them when they just went shopping the other day. I guess they took a girl with them, and this girl had lost her sister a couple years ago or last year. I'm not sure on the time frames. Well, I guess the girl starts talking about her sister and how she always has her with her, right? And out of nowhere, she says, "Sister, if you're here, give me a sign." And my hairstylist swears that the light started flickering. And I guess the girl's like, "See, that's my sister." And another person that's with them is like, "No, that's just a coincidence." So the girl repeats it again. "If you're here with me, give me a sign." And the light flickers again. And my hairstylist is like, every time she said that, the lights would literally flicker. Girl, when she was telling me that, I was like, what the That's beautiful but scary at the same time. Because I do believe that, when people say they're going to be with you after death, they will really stick around. But the fact that, every time she kept saying that, the lights were flickering, and it was really giving her that sign, that would have been a little creepy for me. It's beautiful, like I said, but it would have still gave me the creeps.
Imagine being lost in a tunnel of caves. That's exactly what level 8 of the Backrooms is, and it's called Cave Systems. Underground rivers, cliffs, and pitch black tunnels. Everything is cold and damp and covered in moisture, and any noise you make will be loudly echoed. If you hear any sounds, the echo is so bad that you won't be able to tell where it originated from. There are falling rocks, and steep cliffs can appear without warning. Since every tunnel looks so similar, it is extremely easy to become lost. Giant cave arachnids are the entity here. They are enormous spiders, and they cling to the cave ceilings. They hide in the darkness. They will ambush their prey, and they have extremely dangerous venom. Their spider webs are so huge that they can stretch across tunnels and get you all tangled up and stuck before you even realize what's going on. This level also has the possibility of you coming across so many other entities. There are some pools in this cave just filled with water, and some of them are shallow, Some of them are so deep that no one's ever explored the depths. Certain underground rivers or hidden tunnels might lead you to be able to exit this level. No matter what you do, stay alert, because you do not want to become the prey of that ginormous spider.
What would you do if you watched something break off the wall, only to find it perfectly repaired moments later? Scary story time. One of my cousins has a best friend of 15 years. Let's call her Faye. They've been friends since high school. By this point, everyone in my family knew Faye. My cousin was constantly talking with her for hours, and they were really close. Earlier this year, I started hearing news about her. She had become extremely sick and depressed, constantly screaming and saying she wanted to end her life. My cousin was pregnant, so she sent her mother, my aunt, to Faye's house to help Faye's mother and keep an eye on her. They had psychiatrists and therapists coming to the house because Faye refused to leave. She would fight, scratch, and bite anyone who tried to help her. She would scream and swear at anyone who ever whispered a prayer. The therapy wasn't helping, but the psychiatrist prescribed her some medication. Keep in mind that all of this happened over the course of a week, and I was constantly eavesdropping for any updates. Everyone said that Faye was depressed because her boyfriend had broken up with her. One night, my aunt decided to stay at their house. She said Faye suddenly jumped out of bed and almost threw herself out of the apartment window. They managed to stop her, but she fought back. She grabbed onto the curtains, and when they pulled her away, the curtain rail snapped off the wall on one side and fell down. They eventually forced her to take the sleeping medication so she could finally fall asleep. The next day, while my aunt was clearing Faye's room, which was an absolute mess, she heard a soft tap, tap, tap coming from a wall. She assumed it was probably the neighbors next door, so she didn't pay much attention to it. But when she turned around to clean the window, the curtain rail was back on the wall, completely fixed in a matter of seconds, as if it had never been broken. My aunt said she ran out of the apartment immediately. Later, I talked to my cousin. It turns out that Faye, who was very beautiful and successful, had always wanted to get married by the age of 18. At some point, she decided to visit a woman who they described as a witch, who supposedly practiced black magic with the help of a jinn. They had an argument over money, and the woman allegedly promised to make Faye go mad and eventually end her life. Faye is 30 years old now, still unmarried, still struggling with the entities that haunt her mind. And that's the end of the story. So do you think this is a case of mental illness, or do you think there's something a little more nefarious going on behind the scenes? Let me know.
You got your late night snack? This is Last Thread Before Bed, episode 36. This is a little series where I read scary stories from Reddit before I go to bed, and I try not to get nightmares. So boom, let's get into it. So tonight's story is on the subreddit Real Ghost Stories. So this story is from a deleted user, and it's titled Growing Up in Scotland. I grew up in a large old house in rural Scotland during the 1980s. The house had a long steep footpath from the gate to the house, up a slope too deep for a car. We used to have milk delivered between 5 to 6 a.m. by the local milkman, but after a while they stopped delivering to the doorstep, choosing to drop the bottles at the bottom gate. My mom asked why, and the milkman said his lad was scared of the gardener. We didn't have a gardener, and my mom didn't push back or question it, simply putting it down to a lazy milkman's lad, or them wanting to speed through delivery. A few months went past, and my brothers had a friend over to play. His friend told my mom that Sandy's grandpa's in the front garden. He's just standing there with his fork, not saying anything. My mom wondered who it was, walked around the house, saw nothing, asked what he looked like, and had a description of a man with a white beard, tweed bonnet, worn tweed clothing, and trousers held up by a tied string. Mom thought it sounded like the village alcoholic, a mentally diminished man who did odd jobs known as Billy. Everyone knew Billy, and my brother's friend said no, Billy doesn't have a beard, and my mom said of course he doesn't, must be someone else. Other than the beard, this was a good description of Billy. Mom thought nothing worse. About 6 months later, we had swapped to a new dairy delivering to us from a town about 10 miles away, because Mom was fed up with collecting milk from the gate. After a few weeks, there was a smashed milk bottle on the doorstep, and then they stopped delivering, same as before. My mom phoned them up to speak to them, and they said they'd spoke to the lad doing the run, an 18-year-old. He told them he was scared by the old man gardening and was sorry for smashing the bottle, but he startled him by standing over him. This time, my mom asked what he looked like, and he had the same description my brother's friend gave. Old man with beard, wear a cap and old tweeds. There, of course, were a lot of plausible explanations. But it is the one thing I can't explain, because the milkmen wouldn't have known each other, and my brother's friend, who was about 10, would know the milkman either. There were no other incidents in the 15 years we lived there after that. My dad was a local doctor and ex-military man. Being very much the scientist, even set up little trigger traps with fishing lines, ant tent pegs, to see if they would be disturbed by someone passing through the garden, but they were never triggered. No idea if it was an actual old man who gardened or whatever. I'm not religious and I don't believe in fairies, but this is the closest I've come to it. I love this story, guys. This was really interesting. I love these stories like this, where everybody but the ones who live in the house see this entity that's haunting it. Let me know what you guys thought. Follow for more scary stories.
Last night I was scrolling when I saw this video.
Please, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Somebody help! Somebody!
And it instantly reminded me of the real disappearance of Sandra Hughes, because it involves a woman who disappeared in the Sierra National Forest. Eventually, she was presumed dead, but over the next year after she disappeared, many people have claimed to see her, or possibly her ghost, not my words, in the area where she went missing. And each time they see her, she looks distorted and in a worse condition. If you want to lose sleep tonight, stick around and let's talk about it. Just a little disclaimer, I covered this case last year, but I wanted to talk about it again because she has still not been found. Sandra Hughes was a 54-year-old woman who loved the outdoors. So when the pandemic first started, she took the opportunity to solo travel and spent a lot of time in the wilderness all by herself. Sandra last spoke to her family on June 26, 2020, and this is when she told them that she was going to camp alone in the Sierra National Forest. She was really excited as she'd spent the last 6 months in California, often camping alone and gaining a lot of experience in the outdoors. She was actually known to be an outdoor expert and survivalist. So when she told her family about her upcoming Sierra National Forest solo camping trip, they weren't initially too worried. So off Sandra went. But it wasn't long into the trip that things started to go wrong. And no one could have expected what was about to happen to her or other campers in the area for years to come. On July 1st, 2020, a couple of campers were hiking near Johnson Meadows just above Bass Lake in the Sierra National Forest when they stumbled across an abandoned campsite. It was a really eerie scene because it looked like the campsite had been completely destroyed and a bunch of things were kind of just strewn around. The campers then found a folder that contained some important documents, like a birth certificate and a social security card. With the campsite being destroyed like this, the campers felt like something was really wrong. So they called the police to report this. And when authorities arrived, they found that the campsite and documents belonged to Sandra Hughes. And when I covered this case last time, a lot of you guys were pointing out how weird it was that she carried around like her birth certificate and social security card on her camping trip. But I just wanted to point out that I personally don't think it's that weird. Like this wasn't just a quick, couple of days or weekend camping trip. She had been gone for like the last 6 months of her life, and she had no plans to return to normal living. So, I don't personally think it's weird that she took these important items with her. So when the police arrived, at this point in time, Sandra wasn't a missing person, but they did find it odd that all of her personal belongings were just abandoned like that. So they started to look for her to see if she was okay. Nothing immediate was found. But then 3 days later, Sandra was spotted. And this is where the story starts to get strange. So on July 4th, Sandra ended up crashing her car near the Chiquito Pass trailhead in Madera County. This wasn't very far from her abandoned campsite, and the crash didn't appear to be that bad. Other campers were around when it happened, and according to them, Sandra somehow collided with a tree, and her car ended up high-centered on a stump in a ravine. Based on witnesses and the damage to her car, Sandra wasn't going very fast at all at the time of her crash. Since other campers were around, they offered to help her, but Sandra refused, saying that she was okay. She was then seen walking into the woods alone, and what happened after this has never been explained. It was at this point that Sandra was officially reported missing, and authorities became more concerned after her car crash. A massive search was launched for Sandra, and over the next few days, she was seen 2 more times by separate campers, barefoot with a bruise on her face. At the time, the campers didn't know that she was a missing person, but they did try to ask her if she was okay or if she needed any help because she did look a little bit distressed. According to them, Sandra seemed like she wasn't there, and she ignored anyone that tried to talk to her, continuing to walk deeper into the woods. alone. Because of this, authorities thought that Sandra may have suffered a head injury after the crash, just due to her bizarre behavior over those few days. But like I said, she wasn't going very fast at the time she crashed, and the damage to her car suggests that it wasn't that bad of a wreck. And those who talked to Sandra right after the fact said that she didn't appear injured. But I guess if you have a head injury, sometimes it's not really that easy to tell. So authorities cracked down on their search and brought in multiple different agencies, tracking dogs, and even searched for Sandra by air. But at first, nothing was found. Then, a few days later, search and rescue found Sandra's sleeping bag inside Yosemite National Park, just 2.5 miles from the crash site. The sleeping bag matched her recent REI purchase, so they knew this belonged to Sandra, but she was still nowhere to be found, and authorities started to lose hope that she would be found alive. Then, seemingly out of nowhere a month later, Sandra was seen by 2 hunters. They are pretty adamant that it was her, and they say they saw her leaning against a tree near where she crashed her car a month earlier. The hunter said she made eye contact with them, but didn't try waving them down for help. And at this point in time, she didn't look distressed or anything like that. They did say that she was noticeably thinner than her last known photos on her missing person poster, though. After this, Sandra's case kind of went cold again. And to make things more difficult, a massive fire broke out in this exact area in September of 2020, and it lasted months. This burned up any potential evidence and quite literally changed the terrain. But surprisingly, Sandra's car didn't burn at all. Authorities had left it in the same spot where it crashed, hoping Sandra would return to it, because with her outdoor experience and multiple sightings, it really did seem like she was still alive out there somewhere. But after the fire and it being untouched, authorities then removed it since it was clear that Sandra would not be coming back to it. There would be no movement in this case until almost exactly 1 year after Sandra's disappearance. And what I'm about to say is genuinely so creepy. I get goosebumps every single time that I talk about this. So in July of 2021, a random family decided to go camping in the Shut-Eye Peak area. They brought their four-wheeler, so it was going to be a really fun time, or so they thought. About halfway through the day, they stopped to eat lunch, and this is when their 3-year-old son started pointing out their car window to an open meadow. He told his parents that there was a woman laying face down with her legs straight up in the air in the middle of this meadow. The 3-year-old said that this woman was dead and she wasn't able to talk or move, but that she needed their help. This freaked his parents out so badly. I mean, can you imagine your little kid telling you this in the middle of the woods? So they went to go look around this meadow, fully expecting to see a dead body. But no one was there. It was literally just them in this open meadow. When they went back to the car, their 3-year-old proceeded to say that this woman was still right there in the exact same spot, and that he was pointing directly at her. The woman was wearing a black shirt and jeans, and she had blue hair, and unbeknownst to him, this was exactly Sandra's description to a T at the time she went missing. He just kept saying this woman is dead and she needs their help. And since his parents couldn't see anyone, this freaked them out enough to make them pack up early and head home. When they got home, they decided to post their experience on Facebook to see if anyone knew anything about the area. And this is when they found out about Sandra Hughes, who matched the ghost description to a T. They then found out that she disappeared within 5 miles of where they were in the woods. So the parents gave this little boy a bunch of photos, some including Sandra, and he picked Sandra out as the woman he saw in the meadow immediately 3 separate times. The Madera County Sheriff's Office somehow saw this post online and actually contacted the family for more information. Sandra's case was still unsolved, so they thought it couldn't hurt to investigate this tip, even if it was paranormal and turned out to be nothing. So the police, the little boy's dad, and the little boy went back out to where he had seen this dead woman / ghost, and authorities swept the area for literally anything, but they found absolutely nothing. Over the years, there have been multiple searches for Sandra, but it's like she vanished into thin air. Although it's not clear what happened, she was listed as a lost / injured missing person. Her family says she was extremely organized and tidy and would have never left her campsite abandoned like that. There are a few theories as to what could have happened to her, ranging from accidentally dying of exposure, whether it was from a head injury or not. She could have been met with foul play at some point, or she could still possibly be alive out there somewhere, although the chances of that are slim. And some people even believe that her ghost is now haunting the wilderness where she was last seen, and that all of those sightings of her are real. I do believe in ghosts, but I'm not entirely sure what to believe in this case. Regardless, it's now been 6 years since Sandra disappeared, and whatever happened to her that summer night in the Sierra National Forest remains a mystery.
Bro, what's going on around